Only in Kentucky can a barn become one of country music's holiest sights, and a burning train empty out an entire town on Thanksgiving. Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm learning a little bit more about Kentucky, one county at a time, all 120 of them. And today, I'm learning about Rockcastle County. Castle County sits in the foothills of the Cumberland Mountains in south central Kentucky, covering about 316 square miles, and with a population of just over 16,000. It has 3 incorporated cities. Mount Vernon is the county seat. Brodhead sits at the headwaters of the Dix River in the northwest. Livingston sits on the Rockcastle River in the southeast. I-75 runs through it, and US 25 meets US 150 right in the middle of Mount Vernon. The name comes from a rock. In 1750, Dr. Thomas Walker, the first white man to explore the interior of Kentucky, passed through this area along the river above what is now Livingston. In 1767, a hunter named Isaac Lindsey came through and noticed a lone rock formation on a mountainside that looked, to him, like an old castle. He called it Castle Rock. The river below it became the Rockcastle River. And when the county was carved from parts of Lincoln, Madison, Pulaski, and Knox counties in 1810, becoming Kentucky's 52nd county, it took the river's name. Mount Vernon was settled in 1790 around a spring called Spout Springs on what was originally swampy ground. It was named for George Washington's home in Virginia. 2 years later, the Wilderness Road was routed through the settlement, and that mattered because Mount Vernon sits at the intersection of Boone's Trace and the Wilderness Road, the 2 major pioneer routes into Kentucky. This was the fork in the trail. Daniel Boone passed through here on his way from North Carolina to Boonesborough. By most accounts, the stretch of Boone's Trace through Rockcastle County was the hardest part of the whole route. The relatively level ground of Laurel County gave way to the mountainous terrain. Boone's party had to ford the Rockcastle River and climb up what is now Trace Branch Road. They camped near the river. According to some accounts, it was somewhere in this stretch that the remains of John Stewart were later found in the hollow of a tree. Stewart had explored this country with Boone back in 1769 and simply disappeared. Years later, whoever found those remains found them in that spot. Now, underneath all of this ground is karst, limestone, caves, sinkholes, and one of those caves changed how the county was used for over a century. The Great Saltpetre Cave sits about 5 miles southeast of Mount Vernon. A settler named Robert Baker discovered it in the late 1700s. Inside, the dirt floor was rich in calcium nitrate, the key ingredient in gunpowder, along with sulfur and charcoal. During the War of 1812, with British blockades cutting off saltpeter shipments from overseas, 60 to 70 men worked this cave, many of them enslaved, of course, leaching the nitrate from the soil, boiling it down into crystals, and shipping it to Lexington to be made into gunpowder. The cave was mined again to a lesser degree during the Mexican-American War, and again in the Civil War. During the Civil War, Union soldiers actually lived inside the cave while they worked because it maintains a constant 58 degrees year-round, which beats freezing in a tent during a Kentucky winter. For decades in the 20th century, the cave became something else entirely. A commercial attraction. People held dances inside of it, weddings. There was a museum, and somewhere along the way, visitors started carving their names into the walls, which is generally how to ruin a cave, except one of the names carved into the wall belongs to Daniel Boone. He liked to carve his name places. In 1997, Steven Seagal's movie Fire Down Below was partially filmed here in the cave. The cave closed to regular tours in the 1970s. Today it's owned by a conservancy group as part of a 300-acre preserve, and it opens to the public exactly once a year for a weekend following Mother's Day. It's just really interesting that Steven Seagal was in the same cave that Daniel Boone decided to carve his name in. The county also has the longest cave in Kentucky's Rockcastle system, Goochland Cave, which runs at least a little over 11 miles long, underground inside the Daniel Boone National Forest. It has 3 known entrances. Nobody has fully mapped all of it. On October 21st, 1861, near present-day Livingston at Wildcat Mountain, Union forces won what's generally considered the opening battle of the Civil War in Kentucky, checking a Confederate advance into the bluegrass before it could really start. Livingston's identity is still tied to that specific battleground today. But the thing Rockcastle County is actually known for started in a barn. In November 1939, a man named John Laird launched the Renfro Valley Barn Dance, broadcasting live from an old barn in a valley just north of Mount Vernon over WLW radio out of Cincinnati. Laird was a folklorist and talent scout as much as a broadcaster, and he wrote a song called Take Me Back to Renfro Valley. Take Me Back to Renfro Valley became something close to an anthem for the place. Lily Mae Ledford and the Coon Creek Girls, an all-female string band, came up through Renfro Valley. So did Red Foley, who went on to national fame. People who study country music history regard Renfro Valley as one of 3 foundational sites in the genre, alongside Nashville's Grand Ole Opry and Bristol, Tennessee, where the famous 1927 recording sessions happened. The barn dance has run nearly every weekend since that first November night in 1939. John Lair built a house and a stable complex on the property in 1944, designing it himself. That old house barn is still standing, and today it serves as the lobby and gift shop for the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame and Museum next door, which opened in 2002 with Loretta Lynn at the groundbreaking a few years earlier. A short drive away, Mount Vernon's Main Street has a stretch of downtown built mostly in 1890 storefronts made by George L. Mesker and Company, a firm out of Indiana that mass-produced ornate cast iron and pressed metal building fronts and shipped them out by rail to small towns across the country. If you've ever noticed an old downtown building with an unusually decorative metal facade, there's a decent chance it came out of a Mesker catalog. Mount Vernon's got a whole block of them. Brodhead sits about 10 minutes northwest of Mount Vernon at the headwaters of the Dix River. Before it was Brodhead, it was Stegall's Station, a stagecoach stop and stable for drovers moving livestock through. And when the L&N Railroad came through in 1868, the town got renamed, and nobody is entirely sure why. The 2 leading theories are that it was named for the railroad contractor who built the stretch of line, or for Richard Brodhead, a U.S. senator from Pennsylvania, who had really nothing obvious to do with Kentucky. Either way, it's known today for the Little World's Fair. Livingston is the smallest incorporated town in Rockcastle County. The 2020 census counted 166 people, down more than 26% from just 10 years earlier. It started as a post office called Fish Point in 1840. When the L&N reached it in 1870, the station got named for James Livingston, a local landowner, and the town followed suit. It sits on the Rockcastle River, surrounded almost entirely by the Daniel Boone National Forest. On September 1st, 1950, a soldier born in this town did something that earned him the Medal of Honor. Private First Class David Monroe Smith was a mortar gunner with the 2nd Infantry Division fighting in Korea. His unit was dug into rugged mountainous terrain, badly outnumbered, and the enemy had broken through and surrounded the position. The order came to withdraw, but by then they were completely encircled and couldn't move. Smith saw a grenade land near his position. He shouted a warning to the men around him, and then he threw himself on top of it, smothering the blast with his own body. He was mortally wounded. The 5 men near him survived because of what he did. He was 23 years old. He's buried in the Jake Ponder Cemetery right there in Livingston. On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 2023, a freight train derailed in Livingston. Some of the tanker cars were carrying molten sulfur, and when they derailed, the sulfur spilled and caught fire. If you don't know, burning sulfur produces sulfur dioxide, which is pretty dangerous to breathe in high concentrations. So the area around the derailment was completely evacuated. On Thanksgiving Day itself, residents of Livingston were out of their homes while crews worked the site. Governor Beshear declared a state of emergency. CBS and CNN both covered it because, a small Kentucky town being evacuated on Thanksgiving due to a flaming train is the kind of news that travels. But good news, the fire was out by that evening and people were able to get home pretty quickly. Every Labor Day weekend, the same town does something close to the opposite. Homecoming weekend brings live bluegrass to the Livingston Bluegrass Center, an open mic at the local grocery store, and enough visitors that a town of 166 people swells to thousands for a few days. So, that's Rockcastle County. What'd I get wrong this time?